Good evening, good day, good morning, everybody. You're listening to the podcast New Dog Old Tricks. It's April 27th of the year 2020. We are making this recording during the quarantine and we are bored out of our minds. So today, me, Max, and Paul are here to talk about games. Well, the old ones, the new ones, and the ones we actually like. The topic we chose for today is, well, how we chose to call it Path to Glory. We'll be talking how we went...
Path to Glory?
Yes.
Path to Glory, that's amazing. You can call the podcast that, Path to Glory.
Path to
I love
Glory.
the idea that you start with, we're bored out of our minds, and therefore we're going to talk about role-playing games. It's not the greatest lead-up I've ever heard.
Well, I know, but it's kind of storytelling, you know. I always thought about storytelling as a thing that you do near a fire camp, you know, when you've done the hunting, you've done the gathering, and then comes the talking, because you can't do anything else, and you're too tired to do anything else. Really, but...
You are unbelievably Russian. That's what I like about you. And what people don't realize is that to actually get to the point where we're able to do this podcast, we're thousands of miles apart. We've got the isolation, and then we've had to do all the technical gibberish. So it's actually taken us about half an hour to get to this point,
at least,
where we can actually get the recording. But we're here to talk about role-playing games, and we were talking earlier about what we're gonna jabber about, and I've always been charmed by the tales that I hear of how people over in the CIS in the Russian region ended up discovering role-playing games and figuring it out. And by the same token, you were kind of charmed by how I'd ended up finding role-playing games and figuring it out. And so I think our attempt here is to try and find some sort of cross ground where I tell you the stories of how I got into it, and then you share the stories of how you got into it, which I think is going to be kind of cool.
Yeah, we'll see. Mine is not a standard story, if there's any standard story for a CIS guy to get into role-playing. But probably we could start with you. Or we should start with you. If you want, I can go first. It's fine with me either way.
I'm older. Age before beauty, I believe, is the system.
Well, yes, but then you would go first on both accounts.
I got into because of my brother. Very games. Walk past and for no reason at all. I'll try that. It's always had something about the virus about it, like someone else wants to infect you with it, and you see other people sort of hanging out with it. You go, I should try that out. So it was my elder brother who had gone to big school. So I come from Europe, and I come from a very particular part of Europe, Britain, and I come from the most sort of anti-religious part of Britain, England, and I come from the poverty area of the north of England. And he'd gone to big school, and he had gone to the library, which we didn't have such things where I came from, and he had met people, and he had played this role-playing thing. And my brother has one of those memories where he can just recall things tremendously quickly and easily. He's like got an amazing recall memory. And so he just sat down with the rule book and read it, and then just had memorized it all. And he came home, and like any good bigger brother, he just bullied us into playing.
A whole rule book?
Yeah, pretty much. He's not one of those friends. He's pretty good like that. And so he wrote out the very first character sheets, and he told us the rules, and he just knew loads and loads of the information just off the top of his head. Whether it was true or not, I don't know, but he said it with such assurance that it just felt like it was true. And so we were introduced to this sort of bizarre world of goblins and wizards and you know, strange stuff. And that's how we started playing. And we didn't have the dice. So there's all these crazy shaped dice.
Yes, the polyhedrons. You couldn't buy them, actually.
No, so when we didn't have them, we didn't have any money. And so my brother worked out that by using a coin and a D6, you could emulate the dice in Dungeons and Dragons, which now I think about it sounds completely insane. But that's. So my brother had this amazing memory. He could just pull numbers and data and charts out of his head. And he came back and decided we were going to play. We didn't have the dice because they were the crazy polyhedron dice, and we couldn't afford them. So he invented this system of using D6s and coins. He could emulate all the polyhedron dice using some bizarre equation that worked in his head. And from that is how I experienced my very first role-playing sessions.
Wow.
Which is sort of kind of mad. When you just imagine you're like a baby brother and your elder brother's come back from big school and he just knows all this stuff that's in his head and you don't know any of it. And you're like, so I'm an elf then, I guess? And it's actually where I learned the following order. Strength, intelligence, wisdom, constitution, dexterity, charisma.
Oh, Jesus.
Right, that's the order I learned them, because that's the order my brother gave them to me. And to this day, I can't do them in a different order.
Oh.
Like when I write a character sheet out on a piece of paper, it's strength, intelligence, wisdom, constitution, dexterity, charisma. I can't do it any other way. So it's odd how that sort of imprints on you.
It's like a boot camp. This is my character. These are his stats.
Yeah, and so we went out. We looked in every single board game we had. We stole all the D6s we could get, and the way it worked for D4 is you just kept rolling a D6 and you just ignored 5s and 6s. That got you a D4. And D6s were easy. D8's a little trickier. If it was a 1, 2, or a 3, and it was heads, then it was a 1, 2, or 3. If it was a 4, 5, and 6, and it was tails, then it was a 6, 7, or 8, which meant you had to then spin the dice and flick the coin again. And if it was 2 tails on the run, then it was actually a 4.
That's ingenious, but wow.
That's just the way. I mean, what can you do? That's just the way my brother worked.
So complicated.
Well, we didn't have anything, so we started doing adventure. We couldn't afford anything. We didn't have any adventure. We didn't have any money.
Yeah.
And so he wrote the very first adventure we went down, which to this day I remember. It was called The Black Mace, and it was written on green typing paper and very, very flimsy. And we must have played that adventure God knows how many times, and I just died every single time. It was like trying to unlock a puzzle. It was very, very strange. And then from that, if you forward fast a little bit, we ended up at a gaming shop, and there was a gaming shop that was I lived in a little village, and the concept of a gaming shop was alien, and so you had to go to the scary town. And in this one tiny little shop that looked like you were going to get mugged is where the strange hippie role-playing things were.
Tell me it was uphill both ways.
It was uphill both ways, but what I remember about it going in there is the miniatures, the little metal miniatures in their little plastic bags. And I remember the books, the adventures of their bright colours, and it was Tomb of Horrors and Queen of the Dim-Web Pit, so it was Q1 and S1 and all those. And I remember looking at them, and of course we had no cash, we had no money, we couldn't afford anything. It was terrible, and so they were giving away copies of the Citadel catalogue, which was the miniature company.
Giving
Citadel.
Away? Yes, I know Citadel.
Yeah, and back in the days where Citadel Games Workshop giving you something for free. There must be a catch. But no, they were giving them away, and it was this sort of like flimsy photocopied thing about what miniatures they had, and they didn't have photographs of the miniatures. Someone had drawn them.
Wow.
So there's actually hand-drawn pictures of what the miniatures look like. With then just a description that would say something like necromancer, sorcerer of chaos. And I took that home and I looked through that, those 8 pages for like 10,000 years, and they fired all my imagination up. And then from that, we ended up with our very first character sheet. And my brother brought it back from school, And so strong is the image of the character sheet that I went onto Google and I typed in black and white character sheet D&D 1980, and boom, there it is. Some sort of unofficial, hacked, bizarro D&D character sheet. And as soon as I saw it, I went, oh my God, that's the character, that's it. That's the one. And I don't know what it was like in Russia, but we had these drum copier things.
Yeah.
Where it was all like spirit alcohol.
Wow.
And you would, like, or terps or something. It had a really strong, pungent smell. And everything was purple or blue. Nothing was black. And it was like a drum copier with like liquid. And they'd been run off on this drum copier, I guess in the library. And they were the very first character sheets we had. And when my brother brought them home, we weren't allowed to use them because he only had 2. So we had to hand copy them out.
Jesus.
And I remember it was like school. You had to hand copy out your character sheet.
Wow.
And he was a really mean DM. We would get killed all the time. We'd have to go and hand copy them out again. So that's how I first really experienced it. And it was ages before I got dice. And for the people now, I mean, they don't realize, but the dice used to be, there were these little tiny plastic dice, and they came with a crayon, like a wax crayon.
Yes, so you could draw the number. Yes.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you did. You colored in the numbers and then wiped it clean. And they were dice, and they were terrible dice. As soon as you rolled them, they like had chips and bits got broken and corners got rubbed off, and they were just awful dice with a crayon. I mean, yeah, it really was uphill both ways. So that's what I basically had. And then I remember the very first time I saw a player's handbook. So I must have been playing for, I don't know, probably 6 months before I finally saw one of the fabled rule books. And the reason it's so strong in my mind is because it was a softback. It wasn't a hard, and it was spiral bound.
Oh!
And they were the very first ones that came to England. They were these spiral bound softback, cheap ass variants of the American hardback books. And there was, to my knowledge, we only had access to one. And when my brother brought it back, we were only like, we could have it for the weekend. And they had to go away, and he would spend hours copying it out, like a monk, hunched over a desk, copying out all the charts into this like red book and blue book that he had, and he would do all these detailed notes about it so that he could figure it all out. And then he would spend all night reading it and putting it into his memory because of the way he worked. So that's what we did. We did D&D, or at least our version of it. And I ended up with some miniatures, which I bought in little bags. And the miniatures I got were RuneQuest miniatures.
Oh, the RuneQuest ones.
Yeah, and it was the Citadel. It was the ones. It was a purple cover of a woman attacking like a lizard, or a lizard eating her shield, and they were called 25mm miniatures back then. Not 30mm or 28mm like they are now. And the one I got was Adventures, which was 10. I think it was 10, 2, 4, 6, I think 10. Yeah, 10. 10 adventurers. And the RuneQuest miniatures were unlike any other miniatures I'd ever seen. They had a lot of Greek and Sparta and all sorts of craziness in them. And I thought they were absolutely amazing. And they were very precious, and they came in a box with foam, and they had foam bits cut out of them. And it was years later, I was talking to Rick Priestley from Games Workshop, and he only had one question about them. He said, were they kind of brown? and I said to him, yeah, actually they were kind of brown, now you mention it. He said, yeah, he said we were trying out a different casting material.
Oh.
And he said the problem was, although it was cheaper,
yeah,
and it did hold in the mold, he said if you drop them on the ground, they shattered into really dangerous splinters. So we stopped doing them.
Jesus. Jesus Christ. You had frag grenades for miniatures.
Which is a true story. And then years later, I have a full set of them. And my wife, who is a very competent painter, agreed to paint them for me for my birthday. And so she painted them up. And I remember she was living in America at the time, and I was over in Prague working on tanks. And I remember she called me up in a fit of rage as she explained a couple of things. The first was they were really hard to paint because the detail was terrible, despite my memory that they were brilliant. She then explained that she dropped one and it had shattered into tiny pieces. It was made of the brown crap that they shouldn't have made. So I had to go and get a replacement. But I'm looking at them right now, and they're great. They're everything I ever wanted. And what I've done with them is that they're now the only miniatures I will adventure with. So when I adventure, I don't care what character I'm playing. It's one of my RuneQuest miniatures. But getting the RuneQuest miniatures led me to getting the RuneQuest rulebook. And I had the British version of it, which came with Apple Lane and some other stuff. And I found RuneQuest to be completely incomprehensible. It was percentage based. You had to roll to hit which part had a critical hit table, and it was very much that sort of tribal, earlier world, simplistic religion thing, but with ducks and brew goatmen. And clearly I wasn't Californian, and I didn't smoke enough drugs to fully understand or appreciate the joy of RuneQuest. So although I liked the imagery, I couldn't get past the fact that you could be a duck. And so I quickly fell out of favor with it. And then I remember I picked up a copy of a game called Tunnels&Trolls.
Yes, yes, yes.
Which I think should have a record of being the most blatant piggyback game of all time. If there's D&D, this is TNT.
Yes. Funny enough, my enthusiasm is because TNT was my first role-playing game. It was the first one.
Oh, that's a great segue. So let's get on to you then. Tell me about you and Tunnels&Trolls.
Actually, it was the British version of it. What's more curious, because I of course we didn't have any game shops. Well, in Russia we still have quite a shortage of them, really, when it comes to role-playing games, and we didn't have.
Hang on a minute, help me out here for the people who are on the West who are going to listen to it. What year are we talking about?
Well, let me see. When I was getting into it, it was the 90s, I think.
So in order, the wall had come down in Berlin.
So okay, all right. Let me get chronological and also disclose my birth. I was born in 1985, so
Right.
I was still born in the USSR. Yes, but then when I was 11 months old, we went to Cuba. So I spent 3 years on Cuba. Then we went back to Russia. Well, back to the Soviet Union.
Which was still the Soviet Union back then.
Which was still the Soviet
So
Union.
you were still basically CCCP.
Yes, the GGP, as the Italians called it. Yes.
GGP.
GGP.
Still a great logo.
I know, one of the best actually, and we still we kept the anthem, so it helps a lot.
So there you are. You come back from Cuba, and you're still the Soviet Union, but you're in the last throes of it, right?
Yes, of course. So we didn't have anything role-playing games related by that time. Then there was the perestroika. We lost all our savings due to the banks failing and everything failing.
So hang on again, just to help my Western people. There are two words, right? There's perestroika.
Yes.
And then what's the other one? Gladnost.
Glasnost. I didn't care for Glasnost, but they started showing this really cool Lego Lego cartoons on the TV, so I really
Right.
like those. And
So the communist propaganda it was laid low by Lego cartoons.
yeah,
Fabulous.
I really liked. Well, my mother told me that I really liked Gorbachev talks because they put me to sleep. Just like a baby I was. So
Well, he was certainly figuring out how we were going to have to reconstitute paying people for grain. I remember that.
yeah, I don't remember anything of it.
So
Any of
there
that,
you are.
yes.
You lived through that perestroika. So if you're in the West, you've heard the word perestroika, but what did it actually mean if you were there?
Well, nothing actually. It meant that you started having those really shitty hot dogs in a can.
Well, we still have those, just so you know.
Yeah, we don't have them any longer. I still remember the taste.
Well, I don't think that ever leaves you.
Yes. So, what was actually good? We started having the Kinder Surprise, those chocolate eggs.
Oh, chocolate eggs with the little yellow things inside the toy. The
Yes.
disappointing toy.
Yes. I loved those toys. Of course, I loved those toys. Come
And
on.
that's great because they were disappointing. They were setting you up for capitalism.
Yes.
And that there was a big promise, and then there was an excitement, and then inside there was this fake happiness of something
Are
that
we
was
still
actually
talking
terrible.
about role-playing games? Because
No, I'm just rolling through it. So what I think is fascinating is that the time period we're talking about a 10-year jump. So it's 10 years from where I am to where you are, and yet here you are encountering tunnels and trolls.
Well, no, I encountered them a lot of time, quite a lot of time, 10 years into the future when I first encountered them, and I encountered the English edition of Tunnels and Trolls because.
So what year is that?
Let me see. So, Perestroika, Glasnost, I went into school. When I was second grade, we went to
Right.
Turkey because my father got a job while working for the foreign ministry in the embassy, in the Russian embassy in Turkey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we went to Turkey and I spent 4.5 years in Turkey. Not the bird, the country. Sorry.
Slow burn gag. It's all right, don't worry. There are people from both sides who are laughing at that joke. Keep going. I want to know the date, though. Give me the year.
I'm trying to remember. I'm desperately trying to remember it. It was somewhere 97, 98-ish. I think it was
just before the Matrix 1 was released.
probably not 95. Oh, yes, I know how I can find the date. The digital version, the remastered version of Star Wars just came out, and we went to see it in Turkey, in Ankara, to the cinema theater. So I saw my first viewing of Star Wars was actually in a cinema theater, in a movie theater.
I think that's amazing. So there you are in the latter half of the 20th century, watching your first experience of Star Wars on the cinema. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. I try to explain it to people who've never been to Russia, and I go, it's an amazing country with amazing people, but it's got this strange, bizarre world that to try to explain it, it just sounds loopy to the people from the West. They sort of go, what do you mean the first time he saw Star Wars was in like 1998? You go, well, it just was.
No,
So,
what year it was? I can't find it now.
No, I'm with you. It probably was that. So because at 1993.
Yes, 1997. Yes, here it is.
Yeah,
1997.
So 1993, yes. Just to get you a marker.
Yes.
A low point in Star Wars love, by the way. There wasn't a lot of people who loved Star Wars in 1993, but me and Kevin Smith were about the only people who did. In 1993, I was in London, and I had clambered on my hands and knees into the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon because I found the guy who had the actual Millennium Falcon prop, and I'd tracked him down and asked him nicely if I could go into the Millennium Falcon, and he'd agreed to let me do it. But the point being that 1993, no one gave a damn about Star Wars in the West. They all thought it was dead. And then by the time you get to 1997, there's you watching it for the first time. And so just before the Matrix hit cinemas,
yes,
that's when you got to Tunnels and Trolls.
Yeah, Because I was learning English. I never learned any Turkish. Still,
Oh, very good. I
yeah,
approve of that.
still.
To be clear, the reason that I'm happy you learned English, not Turkish, isn't because I don't like the Turkish language. It's because you speak English so beautifully, I'm able to communicate with you.
Yes,
Whereas
thank you. That's mostly thanks to those guys who taught me English in Ankara. Because before that, I was studying English. I started learning English when I was 5 years old, because they were really,
After your time in Cuba, you devil. So
yes, where I actually met Raúl
to this
Castro.
point,
Okay, sorry,
I still want to know how Tunnels and Trolls ends up in your hands. Where are you, and how did you end up with a copy of it?
So that was Ankara, and near the gym where I went studying Taekwondo, there was a small bookshop, and it was the used books. And I really loved books. I was always a book guy. I spent hours at the library. So I went there, and I saw those books with those really beautiful paintings. It was Tunnels and Trolls, Tavern of the Blue Frog, Tavern, Tavern of the Blue Frog, and the Game Master of Karajan, I think.
Oh wow! So you're talking. I mean, so that's not. I mean, that's late Tunnels and Trolls. I'm gonna
Yeah,
excuse my
yeah.
Blue Frog. I'm just looking it up on Google. Oh, I see. Yes, you're talking about the Joss Kirby covers.
Yes, exactly those.
A cute fact about that: Joss Kirby, who did the covers for those, ends up doing the covers for Terry Pratchett books.
I know, and I loved those, and I always thought of him as the guy who did covers for Tunnels and Trolls, who also made covers for Terry Pratchett.
Oh no, that's absolutely amazing! Because he did do them, and they're all absolutely crackers and bonkers. And then he ends up doing the Discworld stuff. So there you are. You jump into Tunnels and Trolls.
Yes, I jumped to Tunnels and Trolls. So Tunnels and Trolls became my first adventure, but they were those play-along books where you choose your own adventure. And I was trying to get my friends to play with me, but we didn't know how to. Well, I didn't know how to run an adventure, so we just made several characters and we tried to go through the book. Using all of our characters together, but because the book gave you the rules actually, but didn't explain that you could make your own adventure. Of course, we steamrolled everything, and my friends were kind of bored, and they said that this sucks, mate.
Oh wow! So they gave you abuse.
Well, not really. Nobody could give me abuse. I mean, I studied Taekwondo, so they were like, no disrespect, but this kind of sucks.
But don't kill us.
Don't kill us, no.
So, because they weren't telling you how to run the adventures, then you were sort of locked in the sort of choose your own adventure lunacy that they were doing.
Yes, I was, and then I tracked down all the choose your own adventure books that they had at the British Council Library, because they had some of those. And then I started reading. We bought our first computer. I think it was I think it was the same year actually, or 1998. And my first game was Diablo.
Wow! So you literally go from Tunnels and Trolls to Diablo.
Yes, and
that's gotta be a head mess.
The actual head mess was going to my friend and seeing him run, one after another. We were all playing Wolfenstein 3D, and then he bought a disc with Duke Nukem 3D.
Oh wow!
So
right, okay.
We loved that game, and then he got his hands on Quake, and it actually ran on his father's computer. And
oh wow!
That got my
segue.
mind
I was
blown.
the 29th person in the world to get to download Doom.
How come?
Because it was on CompuServe, and I was number 29 on the download.
Wow!
And I broke my company's internet because back then, when you had the machine gun, the chain gun,
yes,
the amount of packets it sent over the internet would collapse.
Wow!
Well, it wasn't the internet; the network would collapse. But yeah, that was my minor claim to fame on that. So hang on, so let's get back. So you're doing Tunnels and Trolls,
yes.
You choose your own adventure nonsense. You're not making your own adventures.
No.
You then segue immediately into Diablo Loot Crate Madness.
Yes, because that got me into buying magazines about video games, and there was this guy, I think Chaos Mage was the nickname, who was writing about, well, I think I'm missing a couple of years, but let's make it a bit shorter, because he started writing about D&D. There's this game, this tabletop game, AD&D, and you could play it on the computer, and you could, play it with your imagination, and you could come up with your own adventures. And I was like, I can make my own Diablo with any classes I want. That must be.
I think that it's amazing that the thing that bounces you into D&D is I can make my own Diablo.
Yes, but
that might be more priceless than anything I've heard.
And then I see a disc, a computer disc, a CD disc sold, the complete Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm like, the complete thing, the whole thing is there. So it got the campaign maker book, it got all the books, it got the player options, it got the character creator. I think it was some kind of official stuff.
Oh wow! So you were like deep into the end of second edition?
Yes, and I couldn't make anything out of it. I did not understand anything. I created a couple of characters, and I didn't know what to do with it because I was so used to tunnels&trolls and Diablo.
Lugers, take that, you fiend.
Yeah, yes, holding your hand and actually showing you some kind of adventure, and it didn't have any adventures. And of course, I didn't read the Game Master's book. I read the player's book because I wanted to play. I didn't know what the Game Master was at that time. So let's skip a few more moments ahead. And actually, the first time I played a tabletop role game, it was Legendary Adventures, and the year was 2001, and I went to the university.
Dear Lord, so 2001, you're getting into Legendary Adventures, and I was... Where was I at that point? I mean, I'd gone through absolutely everything. I'd chewed through tons and tons of stuff. Legendary Adventures is the Gygax variant.
Yes,
and it's at least one table you could roll on per page of the book.
Yes, I really loved that.
It was a very table-heavy game. I remember that. And I remember it was called Legendary Adventures because originally he called it like Dangerous Destinations or something.
Oh God!
And it was like D&D, and he was going to get sued.
Oh.
So he had to change it to different letters of the alphabet. He used to be an insurance adjuster.
Wow.
Which is where all that bell curve number nonsense comes from. It's in all his charts. That's true. God. Okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll bounce back to where I was.
Yes.
So once we got a bit of mileage, and I had looked on with envy, and my brother ran all my adventures. He ran all of them. I didn't go down them, and then he made them all. We had no money. And then I had my birthday, and I had a module bought for me, and it was B3, Palace of the Silver Princess. It was a D&D basic module with a thing called the Decapus in it.
Wow.
And I was not to know at the time that this was an infamous module because it had been originally printed with an orange cover and had been pulped and removed from publication because D&D had this reputation of being to do with demons and devils.
Yes, the moral panic.
Yes, there was some dodgy artwork in it, and so I had the sort of hastily recut version. And I remember a guy called Errol Otis did the covers, and he had this very sort of dreamy 1970s rock album aesthetic, which wasn't particularly to do with realism, but very bright colors. And years later, I asked him to do me a painting, which he graciously did. Because he imprinted so hard on me. I must have run that dungeon a million billion times because that's just the way it worked. I then took a segue into Traveller, which is the space game.
Yes.
Which came with these mini books. And I bought I went big and hard on Traveller. I bought the boxed version, which has the opening statement, which I think I can recall it. This is Free Trader Beowulf calling anyone, Mayday, Mayday. Main drive is gone. The turrets aren't responding. We're losing cabin pressure. Please help, Free Trader Beowulf, Mayday, Mayday.
Wow.
remember that was the opening. That was what was written on the box, and it came with this thing called the Spinwood Marshes, which is this enormous map, which I remember having on my kitchen table, and it was just full of incomprehensible nonsense. It was like A*.C, circle, line, blue, blob, and millions of them. And I didn't know what the hell it was.
You actually played them.
No, so I used to use it as a way of inventing D&D names. I would just steal planets as D&D names. And I used to buy a lot of White Dwarf back then, which was the magazine. And it was before it had become like full-on Games Workshop. And so, a lot of people don't remember, but White Dwarf back then used to have articles on D&D and Traveller and RuneQuest and all that sort of stuff. And so I started with White Dwarf 29, which has these like two dragons fighting, and I think it had like time travel in D&D was like one of the big things that it had on it. But my brother then stopped playing, and that then answers the second question that you asked me before we started, which is what moved me from a player to a DM.
Yes.
And what moved me from a player to DM is I lost my DM. And so it was like, well, if I don't run it, we can't play. And I remember going through a very strange and peculiar cycle. I sort of liken it to like magic. If you watch someone do a card trick, it's kind of cool, and they sort of they do it, and then you try and figure out how they do it. If you then try to do a card trick, it's a different logic, because now it's about, this is the mechanics of the trick, this is how the trick works, and now it's about you perfecting a performance. And it's no longer about how is the trick done, why is the trick amazing. It's more about how do you do the trick so that the audience are amazed.
Yeah, because you have seen the smoke and mirrors, but now you are just pushing out smoke with no mirrors.
And I often say to people, if you're not prepared to cross that line, you should never DM. You should just stay being a player, because it changes you forever, being a DM. All of a sudden, you think you're getting ultimate power, and you think you're going to be able to like bully people and tell people what it is. And I've met some DMs like that, but actually that's not it at all. You're an artist. Your job is to amaze, enthrall, and entertain, and you have to do it on the balls of your feet. And it's actually really, really hard. It's really hard to be a great DM. It's easy to be a crap DM.
Jesus.
And it's not too hard to be an okay DM, but it's really hard to be a good DM. And that's what I did. I ended up doing that. And then I went through from 1984 to 1993. Is that right?
1993, yes.
Yeah, 84 now, so 9 years. I must have played at least four times a week.
Wow.
At least. And sometimes I played 6 times a week. So I played a lot of DM. I played a lot of D&D. I didn't always DM. I had another guy called John, and he used to DM, and a guy called Nick. But John and I were like we did 90% of the DMing, and then Nick did 10% of the DMing. But I played a lot because we had no money.
But you had those books sold. You could actually buy them, right?
We could get them at that point, although the only books I ever owned, I owned one player's handbook because it's all I could afford. But yeah, so I was blessed. A couple of my friends could afford them, and they had them. But yeah, money was really tight back then, and you used to share the books around. I remember Adrian lent me his monster manual, and I took it home and just read it like page to page all the way through. And there was no easy access to photocopiers. There was no internet. There was no way of downloading it. You couldn't take it to a print shop. Getting it copied would be horrendously expensive. So I'm not sure that D&D was built as a money-making venture, because it was terrible at that. But
probably
with a pad of paper, some pencils, and some dice, and some imagination, you could really kick up some amazing stuff. But at least I had the books. Whereas for you, I mean, you're the Matrix movie's about to come out, and you've got Tunnels and Trolls. Like, when on earth did you finally, like how hard was it? Because I suppose you need it. You can only get it in English. Like, how do you get it in Russian?
You don't get it in Russian. You don't get it in Russian. Well, you don't get D&D in Russian until late 2000s, actually.
God.
And then they only translate the player's handbook, and it sells horrendously. So the GMG, the Game Masters guide, and the monster manual never come out. And we're talking about 3rd edition D&D. So those never.
Yeah, 3rd edition, not even 1st edition.
No. And that stuff never actually comes out in Russian. And I think the 5th edition only came out in Russian in 2000. Well, the 5th edition came out in Russian in 2018. So, well, everybody rejoiced, except for me, but we'll get to that later. Because at the university, when I said that my first role-playing group was playing Legendary Adventures, it was with the guys who made the first, well, actually printed Russian role-playing game. It was the Age of Aquarius. It was about this institute of special agents who were fighting supernatural force, kind of like Bureau 13, but Russian. And the author of that game was none other than Vyacheslav Makarov, Slava Makarov.
I was about to say, Slava Makarov, who I've worked with Slava. I think Slava's amazing, and he's one of the powerhouse creators for World of Tanks. And then I've discovered that he made a role-playing game.
Yes, he made a role-playing game, and then they decided that they wanted to actually translate some other role-playing games. So they contacted Gary Gygax, and well, they got the rights to translate Legendary Adventures. But they were a bit too slow on the go and too short on the money to actually publish it. But I participated in the translation process as well. I translated the whole of equipment section.
Oh my God! How many Joss did you need to do that?
Lots of them.
You need a lot of Joss, don't you, in Legendary Adventures?
The funny thing is, they just gave a list there, and I wrote a short description to every item there was, giving it a slight, upsell vibe. Like, you use this to poke somebody real hard, and this one is a bit longer, so you can poke them harder. Something like that, because it had a shit ton of pole arms.
Oh, well, he loved his pole arms.
Yes, he did.
I met him at Gamescom, Gen Con, and he was signing my book, my original AD&D copy, and I chatted to him, and we rolled up a character. He very graciously allowed me to roll a character with him. But yeah, no, he was obsessed with pole arms, obsessed with charts. All of that's true.
That's when I learned that Gary Gygax didn't like Christmas very much.
Tell me more about that.
I don't know much, because my friend who was the GM for us. He was mostly doing the GMing stuff, and he was, writing letters to Gary Gygax. And every time we came to his house, he would, just be at his computer, and then he would stand up and he's like, "I had a letter from Gary Gygax. He doesn't like Christmas very much." And I was like, wow. More like talking about Matrix, I sounded like Keanu Reeves, like, wow.
Whoa.
Yes, the whoa. So that's how I meant the bunch.
What I like about that story is that it's 3 decades too late. Because if you'd have been, we were talking to Gary Gygax about converting D&D, you'd have been glorious.
Yeah.
Like, you'd have just won.
Exactly.
Joy.
That's 2003, I think.
Like the fact that you were talking about Legendary Adventures in 2003
Yes.
is a testament to Gygax's ability to flog a definitely dead horse. So does that mean that you don't have the experience of going down Tomb of Horrors and Slavers
No,
and
no, no,
Against the
none of
Giants?
them, none of them. Couldn't get your hands on any of those modules, and the stuff that we got in our hands, it was really random because, well, I was studying at the University for International Relations, and this is not international relationships, as we joke. Uh, so we had lots of fathers who were diplomats and who were traveling, and they would bring along those books. They didn't know what to buy, or we didn't know what to choose, so we would have these really random collections. We would have Legendary Adventures and Deadlands, the classical one.
Oh, what the cowboy zombie game?
Yes, yes, yes. I still love it. It has the Bruce Campbell on the doing the forward.
Yeah, so Brom did a lot of the artwork
Yes.
for that game, and I first met Brom down in England in Hastings, where he had turned up. He'd just done the artwork for Dark Sun, which was his breakthrough art with TSR.
Wow.
And he he had very long hair back then. And years later, I met him at another show, and his daughter was there, and I told very embarrassing stories about Rob and how he worked. But that's also where I met Rob Ruppel, who was also one of the big D&D artists back there. He was also in Hastings, and Jeff Easley, and all three of them ended up doing paintings for me, which was really, really nice. Which I still have, which is lovely. But yeah, no, Brom was an absolute sweetheart, and I remember he did that game because he was a big cowboy fan.
Yeah, he was, and I think he wrote a book with a cowboy.
Oh yeah,
character,
no,
yes.
he's a huge cowboy fan. I mean, that was the like perfect game to get Brom to do art for.
Yeah.
Where you can have long limbs and slightly zombie people and guns and cowboy hats.
Yes, Mr. Stone made by Brom as well. And to be honest, Deadlands is still probably one of my favorite games.
Well, and what I like about it, when I actually got to look at how role playing had gone in Russia, it is this sort of like totally mad subgenre where, because you didn't have any of the D&D begats, RuneQuest and Tunnels and Trolls, which begat this Traveller. Like, there is a sort of hierarchy, and you see sort of an additive version you can see of it, and it sort of changes a little bit when the gun fu stuff turns up, and then vampire turns up, and you get a sort of more like storyteller stuff, and Dragonlance and Fifth Age, and it sort of becomes a little bit more Crucible-y back then, but it was actually pretty structured, and it was pretty much what it was. You battle tech and you roll master sitting over in a corner, but as a whole, riffs and God, what was the Steve Jackson one? GURPS,
yes.
All that sort of stuff. It's all pretty much from the same central seed of that sort of westernized variant of what it was. And then you get over to the CIS and you realize that because you were starved of it, you weren't given it, you didn't know access to it, you couldn't get translations to it, all the stuff you generate is absolutely insane.
Yeah, that would be the correct term. If you got online, if you could access online, because, well, you could go to the news boards with a feed on that, then you could access some of the D&D translations, and they would use, the Russian mythical monsters to translate the names of the monsters. So the Lich would become the Koshchei, and yeah, there are still some rather heated arguments about that.
Well, but that's what I'm getting at. You get like you're then mixing folklore, and because you haven't grown up with like 10 years, 20 years of it, like the Tomb of Horrors literally only exists because the batshit crazy adventure was brought out at the end of the 70s by Gygax to shut people up at conventions, and it's a nonsense. It's not anything you would. Lawrence Schicker talked to him about White Plume Mountain, which is a funhouse dungeon that you would never do in the modern era. And you know, the giants and the giant sequences, it's just a bash after bash after bash, and then you have the loopy Queen of the Dim Web Pits, where Gygax was so fed up of doing it, he gives it to Dave Sutherland, God bless him, and he ends up basing the map on a menu that he found in a takeaway restaurant that he liked. And you sort of go, what are you talking about? And you go, no, it's all true. But then you go forward.
That makes so much sense now.
Well, yeah, but then you go forward 10 years, and they get sort of reimagined and revisited, and you have the nostalgia. Then you go forward another 10 years, and again, they're reimagined. You know, Bruce Cordell did a pretty good job with Return to Tomb of Horrors and Return to White Blue Mountain. Giants gets reimagined again and again and again. Tomb of Horrors becomes so big that it turns up in Ready Player One. It's still nonsense. And so it's got this sort of additive detritus sort of inertia to it that's it's like Doctor Who. Like Doctor Who as a TV show is completely insane. A ultimate immortal old man steals young women by putting them in a box and telling them it's good for them by moving them around and never returning them to their home. Like, it makes no sense. It's completely balmy, right? But Doctor Who makes sense because it's been around for 50 years. So it sort of has this sort of level of understanding. James Bond is the same. You couldn't start with James Bond. It would be madness. But because it's been going for 50 odd years, your sort of brain has sort of attuned you to it. And so here is D&D doing all this cracker stuff, and then you hit it cold. And I go, I don't even know what D&D look like. I don't know what green slime looks like if you've not grown up knowing what green slime is.
No, we knew what green slime looks like. It looks like a bunch of pixels from the Gold Box games. Because you could pirate those, and we.
Well, yeah, but that whole idea that's the version of D&D that got to you, I just find it's the reason why some of the most exciting stuff games I've played in my last 5 years has been with people from the East. I was playing in one game, and they brought fascist Nazi gnomes.
Oh yes, those are the gnome, I think.
Yeah, well, exactly. There's you going, oh yeah, that's what gnomes are. And this whole idea that there are fascist Nazi gnomes, I'm like, what are you talking about? No one brings a fascist Nazi gnome to D&D.
Yes, sorry.
No, it kept happening. I would keep doing D&D sessions, and then people from the East would bring fascist Nazi gnomes. I'm like, what the hell's going on with the fascist Nazi gnomes? And so this whole idea of there's this the way they mention monsters, they translate the monsters on the fly for me, and liches aren't liches.
Yes.
And then worse, not only have they got a different name, they've got a different logic for what they're trying to do.
Oh yes.
Exactly. And so I'm having this sort of like bizarre, it's like being on hallucinogenic drugs.
So that's how it is. That's fun.
Because you're sort of like, it's not what you think. Like paladins are another good example, where you go, how exactly do you balance a paladin if you're from the CIS region? What's a paladin to you?
Well, it's a bloodthirsty killing machine that is really stupid, and he has some really nice words to that.
The blood killing, like that beautiful logic of it's a sort of religious fanatic blood killing machine.
Well, yes,
Well, yeah, I remember the first time I encountered that, I was like, "What are you talking about?" They're like, no, that's what they are.
Yes. Have you seen that movie, Alexander Nevsky, about the Crusaders coming to Russia, and those are paladins,
Yeah, no, and so you have this whole sort of like it's born from a different world and it comes from a different thing. So one of the things we do have to do is we do have to play an adventure together at some point.
Well,
so you can see all my Dwarven Forge toys.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
And so we're going. Well, look, it's been wonderful, but it's super late where I am.
And
I must leave you now.
Even later where I am, and I hope you enjoyed this thing, and we'll do this some other time.
Yes, I will put together all the bits of recordings. People who don't know, this has been interrupted like 700 times due to the internet. Hopefully we can stitch something that looks sensible from it. I'll send you some pictures that you can drop into the video so that people can see the things I'm talking about. As ever, illuminating, educating, humbling, and exciting. So thank you for that.
Yes, I can't talk magic to you. You've been there when the rules were written, actually.
Well, as ever, it's a marvelous thing. So join us on the next podcast when I'm sure we will talk wax lyrical about all sorts of madness.
Yes, and Nazi gnomes.
And Nazi gnomes. See you later.
Yeah, I'll have to do that next time.
Ah,
I thought I had I thought I had this program installed already. It's not on this PC. I'm on my laptop.
right.
And it's on my other laptop because, of course, I have a lot of laptops.
Well, this is all part and parcel of when people get to listen to the podcast, it's seamless. They don't realise all the work that went into it.
Yes,
This is the reason, by the way, that movies cost millions of dollars to make.